Welcome back to the Mark Moses Show, only right here on Sports Radio 95.9 The Fan. Right now here on the Club 52 hotline, good friend of mine from Nashville, Tennessee, covers the SEC for the Nashville Sports Radio. His name is Chris Lee, and you can follow him on Twitter at ChrisLee70. We're going to talk SEC Media Days and preview a new season of SEC football. Chris, how you doing today?
Excellent. It was fun to be down in Hoover. It's an interesting experience, and it just whets everybody's appetite for football, which I think at this point can't come quickly enough.
Well, I know last year with Johnny Football being there, it was a complete circus. Was it as big a circus this year when you didn't have the defending Heisman Trophy winner running around?
I don't think so. I mean, and I actually didn't get to be there for Manziel's part last year, but I can only imagine. You know, the thing that really stands out is the lack of standouts, to be honest with you, because last year it was as deep with quarterbacks that I can ever remember. And, of course, many of those guys in the NFL right now, it's really a year where you don't have a lot of names that people know throughout the league. And you know, and even look at some of the guys that were called up there, and I'm like, who's this guy? You know, the three guys that Vandy took, the team I cover, are not guys that most people know and not the people that I expected. So I think just the lack of names made it maybe a little bit more tamer this year for that reason.
We're here with Chris Lee, Nashville Sports Radio, and you can follow him on Twitter at ChrisLee70. But the coaches were there, right? The big boys like Steve Spurrier, I know Gus Malzahn, Will Muschamp, they were there the first couple of days. I mean, that had star power, right? The coaches in the SEC?
Well, yeah, no doubt. I mean, when you talk about star power, that's where it is these days. I mean, so many, Kevin Sumlin, Butch Jones is kind of a rising star. Of course, everybody knows Will Muschamp, Steve Spurrier, Nick Saban, Gus Malzahn. I mean, yeah, everywhere you look, I think right now most of the teams in the league are pretty satisfied with their head coaches, and it is a superstar roster, no doubt about it.
Is hearing Steve Spurrier talk for more than 5 minutes in person, is that just like an amazing experience? I mean, what's Coach like?
I've seen him talk before. I did not get to see that live yesterday because I had something else lined up at the time. But I went back and read every bit of his transcript, and you've got that voice in your head as you read it. And I was just chuckling as I went through it, kind of the not the zinger that he threw towards Kevin Sumlin, but that was kind of funny. And just, 5 or 6 points at a time where he just had funny things to say. That guy's a living legend, and I think we're all going to miss him when he's gone one day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're here with Chris Lee, Nashville Sports Radio. We're talking SEC Media Days, which are going on right now in Hoover, Alabama. And you brought up Tennessee. Butch Jones is now into year 2. What are your thoughts on the job he's done so far, and maybe trying to change the attitude there to get back to winning football?
He has had a tough road to hoe. I mean, he came in, and the previous 2 coaches had just left that program in a mess. I was really surprised at what he did last year. They had a brutal schedule. I just think for them to beat a South Carolina team that ended up, top 7 or 8 or wherever it was a big accomplishment. Darn near beat Georgia, almost beat a top 25 Vandy team. I mean, I looked at the personnel that he had to work with coming in, and I just didn't think they'd do nearly that well. The record may not have shown it in some ways, and I think they looked bad at the end because they lost some games to some great teams pretty badly, but I think he did a lot with what he had. You look at this year, he gets thrown a little bit of a bad break. It wasn't just that they lost some players, but they lost them all in certain spots. I mean, they lost most of their defensive line. They lost all of their starters on the offensive line. And if you're able to spread that out and say, hey, let's say they lose 2 or 3 offensive line starters, and replace one of those lost starters with a cornerback or running back or something like that, I think the blow would have been easier for them to absorb, but that's not how it happened. Between that and the schedule, I think that makes 2014 a real uphill battle for them. The other thing is they've got 32 of their 85 scholarship players are going to be true freshmen. 14 of those guys actually reported to campus in the spring and got a jump on things. But as well as I do, Mark, you're going to find a few freshmen that succeed in spots, but for the most part, you don't build around true freshmen the first year. I just think between everything being stacked against him in regards with schedule, roster, and experience, and the places they lost people, it's going to be a rough go for them this year. But I think 2015 and on is when they really get it turned around if they can find a quarterback which is another big question.
Well, when you talk about Vanderbilt, they have a new head football coach in Derek Mason. What were your thoughts on how he was speaking to the media recently at SEC Media Days?
I thought he did a good job. He's not going to be James Franklin or even Butch Jones with being as polished and as smooth in his delivery. But that tells you a lot about Derek Mason. He doesn't spend a lot of time in presentation the way James Franklin did. He just goes with what he's got. He doesn't really care about the recruiting rankings. He looks for players that fit his system, and if they're all two-star kids, then I think in his mind, so be it. And so he's not a presentation guy. At the same time, I thought he did a good job. I think he's able to articulate what he wants for his program. I think he's articulated that they expect to compete for an East title starting this year. And people have written them off, but you look at the recruiting rankings, those best classes that they've had in the history of the school, all those kids now, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, they're really starting to get experience. I think people have kind of written them off, and I think maybe Mason tried to subtly remind them, hey, don't forget about us. We've won a lot of games the last couple of years. And I think they're 16-4 in their last 20 games, which is something people don't realize. But I think he had a solid performance. Maybe not a steal the day kind of thing like Robbie Caldwell did a few years ago, but I think he acquitted himself pretty nicely.
Chris, look, we know it's a Tennessee state. The Vols are probably still the biggest name in the state when it comes to college football. But is the fan base growing for Vandy, at least, with what you said, that recent winning they've had over the past couple of years?
Yeah, it is, and I think the national title in baseball has helped a lot. They have been overrun for baseball gear, and I think people are trying to get it, and you see it out a lot, but I think the demand is a lot higher than supply. The football program already had that on a good trajectory, and I think just in the last 4 or 5 years, I live in a little town called Franklin that's just south of Nashville, and, I just remember in this area a few years ago, just in the Nashville area, you were hard-pressed to find anybody wearing Vanderbilt gear. And when I moved down here about 5 years ago, I noticed there was a surprising amount of people wearing Vanderbilt gear, and even more than Tennessee, and that was the case then. I think it's been even more magnified now. And look, Nashville's still going to have more Tennessee fans than Vandy fans because the alumni base is just enormous, and most Vandy grads move out of state or even out of country. They're always going to have that working against them. But I'm just really floored at the ground that Vanderbilt has made up in winning fans in this area, that they've still got a ways to go. But, for a program that if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, that nobody wanted to support in a lot of ways, it's just a huge difference.
We're here with Chris Lee, Nashville Sports Radio. Give him a follow on Twitter at ChrisLee70. And I want to get back to the overall conference. It's the first time in almost a decade where the conference can't say they're champions of the BCS era or won the national title and rooting for SEC. Was it kind of weird walking around when the SEC didn't have the championship belt?
Yeah, no, you didn't really think about it much. You heard it mentioned a couple times, but look, everybody knows that the SEC was close last year. Everybody knows that league is still king. One thing that you heard over and over, Mark, was people talking about recruiting rankings, and I remember Kevin Sumlin getting up and kind of laughing about this. He talked about, I think, his first or second year there. They were, all excited about being ranked in the top 10 nationally in recruiting, and he said, then we take another look at it, and we're fourth in our league and third in our conference, and just kind of shrugged his shoulders and laughed. And you hear that kind of thing from a lot of corners. You've got to restock your roster with the talent that is elite nationally, and I think through recruiting, as we're reminded again and again, the SEC continues to do that. Even if it doesn't have the names in terms of the players, I think everybody knows every team in that league has been upgrading the talent on its roster, and that's going to make it a pretty scary league for the rest of the country to face for the next few years.
How much were you told that the SEC Network comes out August 14th? You got to let me know, man.
That was mentioned a few times. There was a girl from Bleacher Report that kept asking the same question in those press conferences, over and over. What does the SEC Network mean for you guys? And Mike Slive talked about it a little bit. Although every time they bring it up, it causes a little nervousness in my heart as a DirecTV subscriber. I wonder when they're going to get off the couch and jump in, or I'm going to have to make some pretty crazy plans for game days at some point this fall. But, they talked about the number of games, and there were two things that were interesting to me. The first thing was they said in the first 4 weeks of the season, all of the 14 teams are going to have one of their home games televised by the SEC Network. That was interesting. The other thing is they're coming out with 4 documentaries right away. One of them is going to be about Frank Thomas, Bo Jackson, and Charles Barkley at Auburn. I think one's going to be about Steve Spurrier. Another one is going to be about Vanderbilt's Brad Gaines and Ole Miss's Chucky Mullins. Of course, they had that collision on the field that resulted in Mullins dying and a friendship that's made national headlines before. I don't remember what the fourth one was, but ESPN, of course, is involved in this, and I've seen almost all of their 30 for 30s. I've seen some of the SEC story things on the Book of Manning. I just really look forward to that element of things because I know how good a job ESPN and the SEC have done at putting together documentary-type things, and that's one thing that hasn't been talked about a lot, but I'm looking forward to that almost as much as I am seeing the games on TV.
That's a good point. I was joking this morning how I voted for preseason, like all SEC and predictions of who's going to win each division. Last year we had Auburn and Missouri play in the title game. Do you have any idea what's going to happen this year? Because I try to put something together, but I know it's going to be wrong.
No, I don't, and I think that goes to show you. I keep kind of this spreadsheet with a matrix of where every team is picked, and all of them are like lemmings. I mean, it's either Georgia or Florida, 1-2 in the East. Everybody has got Florida 3. Missouri either 4 or 5 based on what you do with Tennessee. I mean, and I'm just like, come on. You know it's not going to end like that. I can't tell you how it's going to be, but you almost want to see somebody get a little creative and say, hey, Vanderbilt's going to finish 3rd, or, South Carolina's going to finish 4th, or just something that's a little bit out of the box. But everybody ends up picking the same things. And the interesting thing about it is I think there are more unknowns this year than there were last year. I think Missouri and Auburn reminded us in a kind of a fun way of how just when we think we've got it sized up, we really don't know what's going to happen, even as well as we know the league. And I think we all tend to overestimate our own abilities to see what's going to happen and even to count teams out or give teams an automatic pass to this level or that level. I mean, I think the only thing you can say for sure is Alabama's going to be somewhere in the top 10. And after that, I think, in probably top 5, I'm being very conservative. After that, I'm just not really sure what's going to happen.
That is a great point. You ready for some football, my friend? We're not far off. You ready?
Maybe.
We're only a couple of weeks away, my friend. His name is Chris Lee, Nashville Sports Radio. Chris, appreciate the insight, and I hope I can get you on again.
Thanks, Mark.